We wait all off season for any college football, but we really wait for the big games. And this one is titanic. It's huge. It's massive in the ACC, and it feels like old times. Florida State, Clemson, Death Valley, with most likely the conference lead, regardless of what's going on elsewhere. Duke, we give you a ton of credit and others for taking care of business, but this is still the matchup that everyone's looking at as being for top position in the ACC. We're talk Florida State football here with you each and every Wednesday, 6 o'clock Eastern time. Appreciate Chris Frazier, Spear Addicts. Get on over there every Thursday night. It's 8 o'clock Eastern time, Thursday night, 8 o'clock Eastern time with Chris. And then also George, the Renegade Report. And we appreciate George anchoring our post-game show right here at the Voice of College Football. But get on over to Renegade Report. We will be leaving the links to both the Renegade Report here on YouTube and Spear Addicts in the chat. Please get there, especially with George. Get him to 1,000. We got to push him to 1,000. He does a great job. Guys, how we doing tonight?
Doing well, Mark. Doing well.
Chris, how were you doing about, I don't know, about 3:30 Eastern time on Saturday?
To be completely honest with you, I had two scenarios of this football game, and unfortunately, the one that I didn't want was the one that took place Saturday. But I mean, I'm going to be dead honest with everybody. If you go back and look at Florida State, Boston College throughout history, especially when we go and play in Boston, it's always a tough game for us. I don't care how down Boston College is or how up they are, whether they're ranked, not ranked, hadn't won a game, or undefeated. For some reason, we always play Boston College tough, especially at Boston College. And then my wife and others could contest for this, I guess, best. I didn't get nervous for anything until we turned the ball over the last time in the squid kick. That's when I got a little bit nervous because of what Boston College was starting to put together. They were starting to make less mistakes. And it seemed like Florida State was just looking to run the clock out. So it felt like we got a little bit conservative at the end.
Yeah, even at 31-22, I thought Florida State was in good shape. Yeah, real quick, George, I'm sorry. Now, being a guy that's just watching a football game, and again, I'm watching like 3 games, and I'm watching other games because I think Florida State's going to take care of business. But the closer that got, the later it got, then I was like all in for the last 7 or 8 minutes of the game. And from a just pure football fan standpoint, you, of course, don't want that face mask to be called at the end of the game. And I'm not saying it was a bad call. It was a good call. It was the right call because you want to see how it's going to play out. BC gets the ball. They only need a field goal. Can they drive it? You want to see the drama. So we didn't get to see the drama, and that was a good thing for you two.
There's no doubt, as a Florida State fan, you were more than happy to take that face mask call. Like Chris said, it was just kind of one of those things. Everything that could go wrong was going wrong for us. It got kind of iffy there, man, but just kind of everything. You got the trap game between Clemson coming off a cupcake, off the high of LSU. You got supposedly people are sick with the flu. You're missing a couple linemen. Your starting safety just went down. You go up 31-10, and it felt like, okay, this is it. We're going to run away with it. But like Chris said, it seemed like they started wanting to just keep that lead and run the clock out. And Boston College wasn't through. Those red bandana games, that whole entire weekend they put together, and everything for the red bandana week. It's serious motivation, and in Boston to boot. It's a tough game, and the blowout didn't happen. That critical moment when we went up 31-10, we didn't get the stop. They go down and score, and it just kept snowballing from there. You had the muff squib that Chris mentioned, plus you had, I believe Toa Philly fumbled on that toss, and they take that for a score. So it was just one of those things that you're just compounding issues that, like, everything that we had to do to keep Boston College in the game, we did. And at the same time, they had like 19 penalties. It was just a hard fought in the trenches, sloppy game. And just happy to come home with a win because that's what championship teams do in that situation. They get the win, and that's what we got.
Yeah, so I'd like to hit you both up on the level of concern, not during the game. The game's over, it's done, it's in the win column, but how much you think that's relevant or real? How much of the struggles, or is it just one of those things? You can go through national championship seasons and you have to go back to like 1995 Nebraska before you find a team that just pasted everyone. Everything was 3 scores or more, and just that was the team that beat Florida 62-24 in the national championship game. Even the 2013 Florida State team, obviously, they cruised until obviously the championship game. Don't know that there was another close one in that whole season. I think that was it. Oh, was it Boston College? Was that a close one?
The other closest game. It was really close at halftime. Jameis hit a touchdown to Kenny Shaw to like put us up 3, I believe, going into halftime. And the final ended up being like 44-38 or something, 44-35, something like that. But that was the closest game besides the national championship all year.
And then the next year, even though you reeled off 13 consecutive wins before losing, there were a lot of close, and Boston College was another close one in Tallahassee, right? Yep, I remember that game. So anyway, if you go to championship seat, everybody's playing close games. There's a handful of, and mostly they're against the best teams, but there are those dicey ones against inferior teams, even for teams that competed for national championships. So it's not the end of the world. They survived. It's done, and they need to learn from it. But did you guys see some functional stuff with units not playing well, or things that you're more concerned with lingering and being an issue that has to be addressed?
I will say that I fully expect both of the scenarios of what took place defensively and offensively against Boston College. I fully expect both of those things to have been addressed this week in practice, and that it will not be a factor versus Clemson. But our secondary was extremely mixed up throughout most of this game, especially in the safety position. When it came to where they were lining up, what formation we were running, things like that you would see Boston College do this quick huddle break. They would do a huddle, maybe lasted 4.5 seconds, maybe, and they would break and they would all line up to the ball as quick as possible. And you would see some of our Florida State secondary trying to get in their position of place where they were supposed to be. And 9 out of 10 times in that situation, we saw the ball being snapped as our guy is still running far out to cover the wide out, and it caused a lot of confusion. And something Florida State's been not doing particularly well under Coach Adam Fuller, which I'm not saying that it's Adam Fuller's fault, but what we don't do well is bunch formation. Anytime that an offense has their wide receivers in a bunch formation, one of our corners, for some reason, and there's different corners at different times, I specifically named the ones that did it in this game. But for some reason, when they go out to their break, where the one's going out for a post route, the other one's going in for a quick slant, the other one's going into the flat, whatever the case may be, for some reason we cover everyone that we're supposed to up until they get to the break of their route. Once they get to the break of their route, for some reason we have 2 corners follow one guy and the other one goes out completely wide open. In particular, an example of this is when they did the bunch formation on the 3rd and 21, and they were on their 10-yard line. It might have been 3rd and 17, but they were on their 10-yard line, and we've got them at 3rd and 17. They do a bunch formation out to the strong side of the field, and Jerrion Jones covers this guy all the way till he gets to the middle linebacker and then lets him go. He starts covering the tight end for absolutely no reason. I have no idea why he broke off the route, but he had the guy completely covered like a blanket until the point of running into the middle linebacker. And I don't mean physically they hit each other. I just mean as soon as he got to the middle linebacker, he stopped, backed off, and started following the tight end instead of continuing to follow the gentleman that was his it was his wide receiver to cover. And then that gentleman ends up catching the football just on the other side of the sticks, and it's a first down, Boston College. So I anticipate that those things will be absolutely monitored and fixed before we go into Clemson, because Clemson's offense has been a little bit off, not relatively to what they expected to be. So I think Clemson is going to look at everything that Florida State did not do well, uh, particularly against all three teams, but really against Boston College, because they seem to give us the most problems. And I think they're going to try to up their tempo in this game. Not that they already don't run a quick tempo, but I think they're really going to try to hurry it up, try to catch us off guard, out of position, stuff like that. But offensively, everyone on the Florida State side is wondering what's going on with Trey Benson or our running game, period. Everyone's kind of confused on why we're not being able to carry the ball like we were last year. I can't speak for LSU game other than that's just a really good defensive line. They did a phenomenal job at run defense. They kept an extra man in the box the majority of the time. But outside of that, when you went and played Southern Miss and also Boston College, we have yet to see Benson break out and have a good game. Well, the case for that reason being is even against Southern Miss, we didn't do it. But those two games, here's what's different about those two games and LSU, and now going to be different for the Clemson game, is you had your starting left tackle and Robert Scott out for both of those games. You had your center Maurice Smith out for both of those games. And it's how long these guys have been playing together. They understand every time they're supposed to do a pull, every time they're supposed to do a formation to the right, block left, block right, pull the center, pull the tackle, blah, blah, blah. Whatever the case may be, these guys know each other like the back of their hands. They know what they're supposed to be doing. They know the snap count. They know exactly what formation's set up to be. They know exactly where the gimp, all of those things that I'm trying to squeeze into a very small portion of me speaking, they know it. Now, I think that Washington, the center, has done a phenomenal job coming in and taking over from Maurice while he's been injured, but he does not know the offensive scheme as well as Maurice does. So it's caused us not to get that counter play that we love so much. The left tackle that's taken over, Bless Harris. Bless is a great – when you put these guys one-on-one with somebody, they block preferably very well. But when they don't understand what they're supposed to do on this play, as far as we're trying to push the offensive line to the right to open this hole up on the end, when we just block straight forward and we keep a guy just dead in front of us, which is blocking, but that would be pass defense. They did very well as far as pass defense, did not allow a sack, did not allow many pressures at all. But the problem is on run offense, we were not blocking in the correct directions to open up the holes for Benson. And I see where fans are like, man, Benson missed that big hole to the left. Well, the problem is, and his playbook tells him where the area of where he's supposed to attack at, and that's to the right short side of the field. That's supposed to be where the hole opens up at, not to the strong side of the field where the big hole is, because of a missed assignment. Our offensive lineman missed the assignment, pushed them the wrong way. Benson runs right into somebody. And I think that you're going to see that completely changed against Clemson, because not only is Maurice Smith coming back, but so is Robert Scott in the starting left tackle.
Yeah, man.
Anything
no
on
doubt.
the offensive line, George?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think Maurice Smith is one of these guys, and I've been guilty of it. You know, there's other guys like Kayshawn Sapp that were battling for that center job, and I was kind of pushing for one of those guys, maybe a little bit, you know, somebody to possibly be an upgrade or push him for that position. But you just really see a difference in the offense when he's not on the field. They really missed him these past couple games, and I think that'll be huge, along with if Robert Scott can get back in fixing a lot of the issues with the running game that we've kind of seen the past two games, like Chris alluded to. But also the game plan and the kind of the scheme and the way they played Boston College is going to be a little bit different. Hopefully it's a little bit more man coverage, a little bit more single high safety stuff versus Clemson, and these DBs can kind of man up and just not have as many, responsibilities or, having to worry about passing off too many guys on those bunch sets. Hopefully they can figure something out on that. But besides that, the main thing to me is kind of the X factors, just the issues with traveling to Boston College, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think there's any issues with the ball club as a whole. This is Clemson week. There's not going to be any, issue getting for these guys getting up. If you remember what it looked like coming out of the tunnel to play LSU and, and how they played in that game, that's more along the lines of what you're going to see at Clemson, but it is at Clemson. It is, we're on a 7-game streak, and I believe 5 at Death Valley. This would be their 5th win if they got it. So it's important for us to break that streak. And, until taken down, they are that quote unquote top dog in the ACC, even if they are with one loss, like you mentioned earlier. And the team's ready. We just got to hope we can get those 2 guys back and, get the secondary on the same page, and we'll be good to go.
This is an incredible number. Now, Clemson lost a game in the ACC this year. They lost 3 total last year, a couple non-conference games, really all non-conference. All non-conference games last year. So they swept through 9 straight in conference last year. Had a down year for them the year before. So they've been on a bit of a run, taking a step back, but still the Louisville game of 2016. And I stumbled upon this and I kind of did my own research once I saw and thought, when was the last time Clemson was an underdog in the ACC? Well, even to take it outside the ACC, like when they played Georgia, the opening game of 21, they were a 3-point favorite that game. The one game that's kind of iffy is the 2016 game against Lamar Jackson in Louisville. They were like a 1-point dog or a 1-point favorite, depending on your book, but it was so close to pick them. It was throw that game away. The last time Clemson was an underdog in the regular season, in conference or out of conference, was 2014 against who. That's the last time they've been an underdog in season. The last time they've been an underdog at all was the 2019 national championship game against LSU. They've gone since 2014 without being an underdog. I don't think Alabama can say that. I know Ohio State can't say that. And those would be the only schools that you would throw into that conversation. That's just crazy.
Yeah, there's a clip out there from the last time they were a dog in Death Valley. And I'm not sure if it was that one or if it was a previous one, maybe in 2012 or 2011, maybe, I'm not sure, but there's a whole viral clip of Dabo Swinney doing a pep talk to his team saying, we're dogs in Death Valley. We're dogs in Death Valley. So yeah, you're dogs in Death Valley again here in 2023. Sir.
Yes.
So,
a mere 1.5. To me, that's not being an underdog. That's like a pick 'em game.
Is it down to 1.5? It was 2.5. I believe when it opened.
It might, yeah. I just looked at it early in the week. It was 1.5. And obviously people that know the lines and how they come up with the lines, that's meaning actually that Florida State's more like 4.5 on a neutral field. So they get the 3 points at home. And obviously every home atmosphere is different, and Clemson's one of the toughest. So that 3 points is probably justified at home. But the one thing I'll say, Chris, is that if we're just basing this on what we've seen this year, sure, Florida State gave us a bit of a downer against Boston College, but we saw what this team can do against what I still believe is one of the 10 best teams in the country, LSU. They went out there and curb stomped Mississippi State, and they'll be fine. They're a really good team. But we saw what Florida State could do on the high end. We haven't seen that out of Clemson this year. Now they've only played one really good team. But I don't know if, we talked about it heading into LSU, if this Clemson secondary, though good, can handle that passing attack if it's on point.
Well, I can say this. I know that Clemson fans have a lot of faith in their secondary. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't. I'm not saying that you should not have faith in your secondary. I think that they're a good secondary. I did make a mistake earlier because there was someone that was, and George knows this because we heard it nonstop for like the past 2 or 3 days, that Clemson was using a true freshman in the secondary. So from my understanding was they had a couple of young guys out there, And I said, with them being inexperienced in their secondary. Anyways, long story short, finding out that most of their guys in the backfield are very experienced and they are good. They said they need to stop Keon Coleman, and they think that they can do that man to man. I 100% disagree. I do not believe that you can shut Keon Coleman down if you're going to man cover him, especially when you've got Johnny Wilson, Jaheim Bell, or Morlock, or Biscuit, or any of the slot receivers. Like, it's, to me, when you name the slot receivers like Destin Hill, I think a lot of people are going to be focused on Keon Coleman, a little bit of focus on Johnny Wilson, and they're going to not focus on Destin Hill at all. They're not going to focus on Winston Wright at all. They're not going to focus too much on the tight end, Jaheim Bell or Biscuit, because they feel that they were able to shut Jaheim Bell down when he played against South Carolina. All of that is great, but my problem is all of the guys that I'm naming can be on the field at the same time. And while I think they have it's Nate Wiggins, I think he's good, but Nate Wiggins isn't covering all of them. He's got to cover one of them. He can't cover them all. So I think that Florida State just has too many offensive weapons, and then you throw a Toa Philly in there that runs out from the backfield, and then that's not even mentioning what Jordan Travis does best, and that's when he uses his legs. So I think offensively, Florida State, if we use all of our personnel, we'll be fine. But if Jordan continues, which he did it against Boston College, if he continues to take that deep shot and not throw to the sure route, the checkdowns, he's had a problem with it over this last game. I don't know what it was. But if he doesn't start taking what the defense is giving him, we may have a problem against Clemson if we keep trying to force the ball down the field and not take what they're giving us. So it's all about what we don't do to ourselves in this game, mainly, and making sure that you don't take Clemson lightly at all, which I don't think Florida State will, especially with Clemson holding however many years it's been, 7, 8, whatever it is, for them to be able to hold that over our head. You can't take this team lightly. I get that they lost to a Duke team. That's understandable. Great. That's in the past. They're trying to move past it. Probably already have. But it's time for Florida State to go do what Florida State needs to do and take the game out of Clemson's hands and play a fundamental game where we don't make a bunch of mistakes. And that's how they'll win.
All right. We got a guy that's going to be able to speak a little bit better to this storyline than I have for the last few minutes on the Clemson side. Jason, great to see you. We've got your name not in the customary Clemson orange tonight, Jason. How's it looking there in the FSU? Is it Garnet? I don't want to get that wrong. Garnet? Yes, for Florida State. But Jason, appreciate you being here. AllClemsonTigers.com. Jason joins me every week to break down Clemson football, so we appreciate Jason showing up. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good, man. I apologize for I'm running a few minutes late.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. We're just chopping it up. I think Chris just predicted Jordan Travis is going to throw 7 touchdowns against your secondary, is what he said. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. He was just breaking it down from the FSU side. And I know that you said to me the other day that was one of your biggest concerns. And you were going to be writing about this matchup, the Clemson DBs against the Florida State wideouts.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest question marks coming in this game for Clemson. Dabo Swinney said it many times over the offseason. They had to be better. The pass defense had to be better. It was not very good last year. They were beat up, banged up, and then when they were healthy, they had some busts and coverage issues. I mean, you name it. There's a lot of talent in that secondary, make no mistake. Last year, some of those guys had to kind of learn on the job. They just Sheridan Jones missed a lot of time. Toriano Pride had to play probably before he was ready. Nate Wiggins kind of grew up on the job. I feel good about whoever Nate Wiggins is on. I think he's probably one of the more underrated corners in the country. But on that other side, I'm not sure, man. I don't know if Sheridan Jones can cover a Keon Coleman or a Johnny Wilson. I don't know if Jaden Lucas can cover a Keon Coleman or a Johnny Wilson. I think it's a valid question, and we won't have an answer to until Saturday.
I'm going to let you guys cut loose. I get to talk to Jason all the time, and I get to talk to Chris and George as well. So I just have fun listening to you guys talk some ball. So I'll let you guys go at it.
Yeah, me and Chris kind of both talked about it. I watched a little bit of y'all's film. I was under the impression, I think y'all have maybe a true freshman that plays some at like a nickel role, but besides the guys that have come back that you mentioned, your real experienced guys that came back, who are some of the younger guys you'll see out there, and are y'all going to be counting on them to play significant roles out there for y'all throughout the game?
The freshman you're talking about is Khalil Barnes, who has played exceptionally well in that nickel role the past couple of weeks in place of the injured Andrew Makuba. Not sure Makuba is going to be back this week or not. It sounds like he might be. I think they're just kind of in wait and see mode. He only played in the opener against Duke, but I think Barnes is going to play, regardless whether he starts in place of Makuba or not. You'll see him a lot either way. The other one would be Peter Woods, the interior defensive lineman and defensive tackle. He's going to be on the field a lot. One of the top recruits in the country in the last recruiting class. He has been fantastic through 3 games. I haven't heard his name mentioned a lot. It's not like he's back there getting a bunch of sacks, but he's being disruptive, and that's what they need him to be. He's kind of playing behind Tyler Davis and Ruka Roro right now.
My question for you is kind of flips this. We're talking a lot about Florida State's wide receiver core against the secondary of Clemson, and my question is a lot of folks are jumping to our secondary performance against Boston College, where we did not play particularly well. We had a lot of mishaps, miscommunications, and stuff would have it. Is there a wide receiver or a couple of wide receivers that Clemson should be able to lean on, or maybe they're going to bloom this game or need to bloom this game, that you would point out could be a problem for our secondary?
I think this is kind of 1A, the pass defense and Clemson's receivers, 1 and 1A when it comes to the biggest questions entering this game. You hear a lot about Clemson's wide receivers not being able to get open, create separation, and all that stuff. And, to a certain extent, part of that's true. But through those first 2 games, when the offense was kind of failing to push the ball down the field a lot, there were some guys open. There were some windows to throw in. Either Klubnik didn't see them or he didn't pull the trigger for whatever reason. He'd go to his check down too early. But I think that's something that a lot of Clemson fans are anxious to know the answer to. Can this group of wide receivers be productive enough against a defense as talented as what Florida State has? I think there are some, if there's a weakness on that Florida State defense, it might be that secondary. We saw some guys running free in the LSU game. I didn't think the secondary played particularly well against Boston College. But I don't know if Clemson's got those dudes or not. There is a freshman, Tyler Brown. He's kind of started to really blossom. Was not even an early enrollee. Was not that highly regarded coming out of high school. I think he was a 3-star guy. And he's kind of been, if you ask me, the best wide receiver on the field through 3 games. Antonio Williams, who was a freshman last year, is probably the other guy when it comes to your most reliable receivers. Both of them play the slot, so it's been hard to get them both on the field at the same time. Garrett Riley talked the other day about, maybe moving Antonio outside so they can get both of them on the field, so I think that's something to watch out for. Other than that, it's kind of Bo Collins, He's been around for a little while, has not really lived up to his lofty recruiting ranking coming out of high school. He struggled with injuries, particularly with shoulder injuries last year, more than one. But I think that's a question we don't know the answer to yet. I think we're going to find out Saturday how good these wide receivers for Clemson are.
When it comes to y'all's offense against our defense, a lot of it has been made about getting Garrett Riley, and the first game of the year, everybody was kind of wondering whether it was going to be Garrett Riley's air raid offense, and going, totally brand new with Clemson, or if it was going to be the quote unquote Clemson offense. Well, that kind of answer has been the quote unquote Clemson offense. Do you think maybe he turns them loose a little bit? Maybe there's some stuff that y'all have that y'all haven't shown quite this year that y'all have been working on that maybe wasn't quite ready that we see this weekend? Any, surprises or anything like that, or maybe a shift in the game plan?
I wouldn't say that they've kind of been holding back for Florida State. I don't think you get down 21-7 to Duke and you're holding back. You know what I'm saying? But I do think there are probably some formations and some motions and stuff that we've not seen yet. It's not. He talked a lot in the spring about shrinking the playbook down, or the game plan down each week from, say, 80 plays a game to 30 plays a game, and running it out of a bunch of different formations, and just kind of dressing it up, window dressing. I'm having difficulty putting this into words here. A lot of the same plays out of a bunch of different looks, if that makes sense. After the Duke game, there were a bunch of people convinced that Clemson was running the same offense, and they're not, man. It's a totally different scheme. It's just not the air raid. It's got some air raid tendencies. Riley himself, when people mention air raid to him, he said, no, this is more like the dirt raid. He wants this thing to be relying on the running game. He wants it to be a run-heavy scheme, and with Will Shipley and Phil Maffa, that's kind of, I think that's kind of what you can expect to see. A lot of, you're not going to see a bunch of 40, 50-yard bombs. You're going to see Clemson running a bunch of inside zone the way they always have. You just might see it. The presentation might look a little different.
Jason, is this a rivalry?
Absolutely. I mean, is it on the level of Clemson, South Carolina, or Florida State, Florida, or Florida State, Miami? Probably not. Those are in-state rivalries. They're a little bit different, but I would say it's a rivalry. It's been the biggest game in the ACC far more often than not each season. And I think if you ask most fans inside the Clemson fan base, they'd call it a rivalry too. I think there are, there's a lot of different ways for a game to be termed as a rivalry game. It doesn't have to be that in-state rivalry like Auburn, Alabama, or Clemson, South Carolina, or Florida State, Miami, Florida State, Florida, or it's just. But yeah, I would call it a rivalry. Yeah, I absolutely would. Just maybe not quite on the same level. Maybe the hatred's not quite the same, but inside each one of those buildings, I guarantee you those players look at it as a rivalry.
Yeah, it's definitely a conference rival is what I say. If you want to put context to it, the only difference to me with it is that we've got to hate Miami and Florida for a long time, and it will always be there. It's like our stepbrother, and we want to bash his brains in every time because mom smiles at him. With Clemson, it's like the favorite cousins coming around, and we're going to beat them at whatever family event that this is. That's kind of how I look at it. But I do have a big wonder in what I think. I think Clemson is going to try to get the ball to Will Shipley and Maffa as much as they possibly can, due to the fact of what Shipley has previously done with Florida State over the past couple of years. Also, to base off of what Maffa is doing from last year to this year. Which one is I think I know the answer to this, but how good is Maffa coming out of the backfield on receiving passes? Because we know what Will Shipley can do. I think the kid could line up pretty much anywhere on the offense as far as making plays, wide receiver, tailback. I don't care what he's at. If you're getting him the ball, the kid can do something. What do you think Maffa is just a great compliment to that, or can he be that guy that catches well out of the backfield?
I think Maffa could have left Clemson and been a starter at a bunch of different schools. I think he is that type of dude. His strong suit's not going to be catching passes out of the backfield. Shipley's probably better suited in that regard. But other than that, I in every other aspect, I think Maffa's just as good as Will Shipley is. They are 1 and 1A in my opinion. For me, in this game, I think that the wild card is going to be the legs of Cade Klubnik. I think he's going to have to be a factor in the running game. I think he's going to have to run for a minimum of 50, maybe 75 yards. You know, we've not seen him a bunch on any designed runs yet. I think that might change a little bit this week. We've seen Clemson, you know, in the bigger games tend to lean on that quarterback run a little bit more, and you got to make that Florida State defense account for him. You have to. So for me, you know what you got in Shipley, you know what you got in Maffa. Hey, ask Mark. I've been tooting Maffa's horns since he was in high school, man. He might have the higher ceiling one, you know, when it comes to NFL projections. But for me, this game, when we're talking about running the ball, I think the wild card's Klubnik.
There's no doubt we've had issues, you know, like anybody else in the country would with running quarterbacks, and Klubnik isn't like, I don't expect him to be like a Thomas Castellanos like we faced last year, this 5'10" shortstop who's just running it all over the place. But I know he did run track in high school and was pretty good at the 400 and the 200. So if he gets them lanky legs running, I know he can break one off. So that will be a big time factor on both sides of the ball. I know that'll be a big factor when it comes to Florida State side of things, getting Jordan Travis to run for a few first downs and make the defense really respect that on either side to open up that running game and back the safeties up, et cetera, et cetera.
How healthy is Jordan Travis? You know, after that hit he took Saturday, you have to wonder if maybe they don't not run him quite as much, try to protect that shoulder if it's still lingering around a little bit.
Yeah, it was the non-throwing shoulder. I'm sure they're going to be super careful, but as far as any kind of game of the year, the importance level on this one is pretty high. So I imagine they'll run him at least, if I had to say, 5 times at least. The thing is, like, if he's got to take off a Virginia Tech game, like I think Florida State fans think that they could probably win with Tate Rodemaker, if the case needed to be, and only have Jordan Travis in an emergency situation. But yeah, man, that was every Florida State fan's in the country's throat. You know, heart was in their throat when we seen him go down. But it being that off shoulder and as tough as he is, I don't expect, from the way Mike Norvell's addressed the media, he's not going to give anything out about injuries. But if you can parse between his words and kind of see how he said it, I don't think there's anything to worry about with Travis as far as that goes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get me wrong. I don't think there's any chance he's not playing or anything. You know, you gotta wonder if that thing's still lingering around a little bit. Maybe they don't. Maybe they don't run him quite as much as they otherwise would have. I don't know. It's just something to consider.
No, it's fair.
Jason, while Dabo Swinney gets a lot of criticism for not using the transfer portal, he may lead the nation in bringing guys out of retirement. So, you know, Hunter Johnson was going to hang him up, and he said, you know, we'll take you. We'll keep you around. And now we've got this kicker, Jonathan Whites. I don't remember him off the top of my head. But what's
Jonathan
Whites? Jonathan Whites. I'm going to have to look up his numbers. I don't remember him. When did he kick?
He was the backup to BT Potter the past 2 years. That's
All
why
right.
you don't remember him, because he's not. I think he's kicked 3 field goals in his career.
All right.
He was actually in Charleston taking online classes, and Dabo Swinney caught wind of it and called him up, asking him if he would be interested in coming back to kick. Because if you follow Clemson, you know their first year kicker has struggled. He's 1 of 4. He's missed the extra point last week. He redshirted last year, had an ACL injury right at the end of his high school career, redshirted last year, and by all accounts was just fantastic in fall camp. But once he got in front of the crowd, you know, it's a little bit different. I remember being on the field down there in Durham pregame and the shorter ones, he missed a few, but the further back he went, the better he got. And so far, that's kind of what he struggled with. The shorter ones, his kicks have had low trajectory. So you can't go to the portal and bring in a kicker in the middle of the season. So Dabo got wind of White's being enrolled, called him up Sunday, and he was at practice Monday. He was supposed to just start a job, if I'm not mistaken, in New York in 2 weeks. Dabo said yesterday his boss is probably a little ticked off right now. But, you know, depending on the situation, he's going to be the guy, man. Maybe if it's a long field goal, you see Robert Gunn, because I don't think White's has got that kind of leg. But anything inside of 40, I fully expect it's going to be White's.
What is it that you think Clemson? I guess first and foremost, you obviously believe that there's a path that Clemson can beat Florida State. What is that path, and what is it that they have to do well to get Florida State off of what they've been doing? I guess you would say scoring more than they scored 30 at least in every game this year or more. What does Clemson's defense have to do to stop that from happening?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Clemson can win this game. Make no mistake. I absolutely think they can. I think the key is not letting Jordan Travis get comfortable in the pocket. You have to keep pressure on him. You can't let him sit back there and have all kind of time to scan the field and make decisions with those wide receivers. You gotta pressure him, and you gotta keep him inside of the pocket. You gotta be able to set the edge, keep pressure on him, and when you get to him, finish and bring him down. That, to me, that is one of the biggest keys. You just cannot let Travis sit back there and be comfortable. You gotta keep pressure on him. We've seen in the past sometimes if you can get consistent pressure on him, he's a guy that can be rattled.
You think y'all will run a spy on him, or any particular thing you think they'll do to keep him contained inside the pocket, like you said?
I think it's a possibility. They used a spy on Riley Leonard. Not that it worked all that great. Clemson's run a lot of nickel so far, and I kind of expect that'll be what we see this weekend too. I think the key for me, you got to get pressure with the front four. And Clemson's not gotten pressure at the rate that I thought they would. It's particularly along the interior of that defensive line. I thought they'd be a little bit more disruptive than they have been. Xavier Thomas he's getting some pressure, but not quite what I was expecting. He's getting pushed a little bit around in the run game. Justin Masco, who's been around here forever, the other defensive end, he's played fairly well. But the guy that's really been good is freshman TJ Parker. He's the first guy off the bench at end. He's been the best defensive end Clemson's got by far through the first 3 games. I expect to see a lot of him this weekend. But I think the interior's got to be as disruptive as they've been so far this season. More disruptive than they've been so far this season. Tyler Davis, Rukaroa, Peter Woods, those guys have to push the pocket back and not let Jordan Travis be comfortable. She's got to get her screen time, man.
Absolutely.
Never fails.
Well, who's she picking?
Man.
Do we know?
No. I have no idea. She's stubborn, man. She'd probably go with Clemson. She's stubborn and spiteful.
I'll throw this one out there as a narrative that when you look at the trajectory of this conference and how it's progressed, Florida State owned it under Jimbo 2012, 13, 14. And then you saw really good games in 15, 16, 17 when Clemson was taken over. And of course, they officially took over in 2015. They went all the way to a national championship game. And then from 15 to right now, even though Pitt jumped up for one season, I think we'd all agree Clemson was still the best team in the ACC in 2021. So Clemson has owned this conference ever since 2015, and you saw that transition. You saw that happen. You saw a Florida State team in 2013 in a matchup against Clemson that was talked about, just wipe them off the field. And then you saw that transition and Clemson take over with the 2 great quarterbacks and the better recruiting classes and the tremendous defensive fronts. Now we've seen Florida State, even in a bad season 2 years ago, compete to the last 3 or 4 minutes of the game. Really good game. Last year, again, Florida State wins 10 games and they compete in this game. Is it going to be too overblown to say that if Florida State wins this game, that there's been a switch in this conference, just like there was looking back in 2015?
That's what you're going to hear. I mean, if Florida State wins, that's what you're going to hear. like I've been covering this team long enough to know that if anybody thinks Clemson's just going to disappear off the face of the earth and drop back to mediocrity, you're probably going to end up being proven wrong. Yeah, Dabo's slow to adapt sometimes, but he eventually gets there. It's like with the portal and stuff. What was he? You know, he used to not care for it, you know, but I think he's there now. I mean, let me just put it like this. Was he slow to come around? Sure. I think he's there now. You know, the NIL stuff's way overblown. He's not against that the way this national narrative is out there. Clemson's got a first school in the country to build this big NIL institute on campus, you know. It's just some of the narratives out there aren't true about the Dabo and stuff, but I would not bet against that man. And if Florida State comes in here and wins, look, that's going to be the narrative. Florida State's the new power. Clemson's best days are behind them. I think it's possible that you could see these two teams going back and forth, toe to toe, for the next however many years. Because Mike Norvell's done a hell of a job there since he's gotten there. It is hard to, you know, be critical of anything he's done with kind of overhauling that roster. From my understanding, I don't cover Florida State every day, and I don't have a bunch of guys plugged in down there. But from the people I do know, from my understanding, Norvell would rather recruit the high school ranks, you know. But in this day and age, you know, you got to go to the portal, and you know, you're not when he takes over a program with the roster like he had, he knows he's not going to be given the time that's required to build a program through the high school ranks. You got to go build it through the portal, and I think he's done an exceptional job. They got dudes, man. You know, Dabo Swinney's kind of done it a little bit. You know, he hasn't had to go to the portal. I think you'd have seen him go to the portal last year if they'd had a little bit of room. But, yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly going to be what you hear if Florida State wins. They're the power of the ACC now. Clemson's, you know, best days are behind them. But in my opinion, I think you're going to see these two teams going back and forth for over the next few years. I love what Clemson did with their 2023 recruiting class. I love what they've done so far with their 2024 class. I don't think Clemson's going anywhere just quite yet. You know, I get it. They've had a couple of down years. They missed the playoff a couple of years. And the way Dabo Swinney, you know, runs that program, you might have some years like that. But I don't think they're done by any stretch.
Yeah,
Anything else for Jason?
I agree. I don't see him falling off a cliff, whether Florida State has it for a year or two or whatever. If he's forced to, I feel like he's gonna. That's the one thing you brought it up about the portal. I don't think he's gonna let it end his career not going to the portal. And you said it, you know, Norvell just came in during COVID and he had to get creative, and it ended up being, you know, he established himself now to where everybody's kind of woken up to, we're going to use the portal regardless. So it helps that he's been doing it for all these years. But no, man, it's been fun. I appreciate all the insight.
I've got one. I don't know if you're comfortable with giving a score prediction or if you wait to do that on your show, but I'm very interested in that.
I got 2 more nights I can sleep on that thing. I've not decided yet. I got to have that in Friday, and I bet I've been asked that 15 times already. I'm gonna tell you the same thing I told them. I got a couple more nights I can sleep on that thing. I'll add this because I see some of it in the comments. You know, again, I see it all the time how Dabo Swinney refuses to use the portal. And I know from the outside looking in, it kind of seems that way, especially when you listen to some of these national talking heads who really aren't around this program every day or cover it closely and know how things are. Dabo's never going to use the portal to transform his roster. He's never going to push guys out in favor of bringing a guy in out of the portal. And he's never going to yank a scholarship from a kid that's committed or a scholarship offer from a kid that's committed in favor of taking a guy out of the portal. But if Clemson would have had the room last year, I think you'd have seen him go to the portal and maybe get up to 3-4 guys, address 3-4 positions. You'll see him use it to fill gaps. Like if he feels like he's got a gap from one starter to the next and the guy behind that starter is not quite ready, that's when you'll see him use it. And I think Clemson could have benefited from doing that this year. A lot of people don't realize, I mean, Clemson was had 88 scholarship guys going into the spring, so they were 3 over 85. There was no way they could go to the portal without cutting players. They ended up getting down to 84 when TJ Dudley got dismissed right before the season started. But I mean, it's way too late then. You know, you have to do that back in January, but, you know, if you want them to really get the guys that are going to make a difference. And I'll be glad when he finally does go grab a couple and that this narrative finally gets put to bed.
Well, you said it. There's only 85 roster spots, so it comes down to that philosophy. You're not going to do that exit interview and maybe tell somebody you might do better going somewhere else. You're just not going to have the roster spot outside of, like you said, maybe getting down to an 83 and grabbing a guy or two here or there. But he's been super successful, and he did it different. He was the original guy that did that when Saban was winning all those titles. He did it different. So until he's not there anymore, I'll respect him and be worried about the Clemson game every year.
Yeah, he did it different. Absolutely, he did it his way, man. And it, you know, I got to tell you, I didn't think for the first few years, I did not believe it would work, and he proved me and a lot of people wrong.
Yeah, he's done all right for a wide receiver coach.
He's not done too bad.
All right, good stuff. Jason Priester, allclemsontigers.com. Florida State fans, get there to get yourself prepped for the game. Become a Clemson expert before they kick off at noon on a Saturday. And if you want to hear more from Jason and myself, check out our Clemson channel. Jason and I get together about every week. Jason, appreciate you stopping by for us.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Anytime, man. Appreciate it, fellas.
All right, good stuff from Jason Priester. Florida State, Clemson. There's something a little special when you throw those two names in the same sentence. That's what it's become. And I'll add one thing to your take, Chris, about rivalries. And that for me is that for Clemson, South Carolina is always going to be a rivalry because they're in the same state. Clemson could beat them 50 years in a row. And there's some people are just, they're going to be paranoid about that game and just be into that game. Same thing, Florida State, Florida State, Miami. You could rip off 25 consecutive wins and there's still going to be hatred because they're in state, they're in your face. It's just this is becoming rivalry because of winning.
Yeah.
These two have made each other a rival because they run into each other and they've owned this conference for a long, long time. And when you run into the same team year after year, and that's the one you got to get by, well, they're going to become a rival because they're the only one that's looking you in the mirror that can knock you off, and everybody else when you're laying waste to everybody else. And there's that, you know, there were, as you guys know better than I do, it started about 2012. It was like, you look at the ACC schedule for about 5 years and it's like, it's Florida State, Clemson. That's the only game we're looking at. It's whoever wins that game is going to win the whole thing because they're going to win the Atlantic. Then they're going to dust off the Coastal winner, and that's what it's going to be. So that makes the rivalry.
No doubt. It was two teams meeting at a high level, and those two teams just pretty much decided the ACC for the past 20 years. And even going back before that, you had the Bowden sons at Clemson playing against Bobby. You had the Fumble Rooski. So there's just a history of it being two of the better ACC programs, and it'll always be something. So hopefully we stick together no matter what happens with realignment and everything else going down the road, because it's a fun game to play for sure.
Any parting shots on this one? Chris, go ahead.
What did you say before that?
I was just saying parting shots on this one.
Yeah, I'm going to give my score prediction just based on I've given it already multiple times. Whether Clemson fans believe this or not, I'm not giving the score prediction as a troll. I'm this confident that Florida State controls time of possession, controls the turnovers, controls scoring every time they touch the football. So I'm not saying that Clemson's garbage. I'm just thinking that this is going to be the first game that Florida State plays 4 full quarters of football on both sides of the ball. And yes, it's going to sound like I'm being disrespectful, but it is what it is, and that's what I believe. And what I believe is that Florida State wins this game 45-17.
No,
Sorry.
that would be a statement. That would be
Is that a big enough shot for you, Mark?
Well, I would be slightly surprised, but I wouldn't be nearly as surprised as I would be if somebody said right now Clemson's going to win 45-17. I think the ceiling and the upside for Florida State is considerably more than Clemson. And I think I do typically a pretty good job of evaluating teams from year to year, meaning that we haven't seen, Florida State, we know more about Florida State football than most teams in the country because of the LSU game. Most teams in the country haven't played that game yet. A lot of teams do this week. Ohio State plays Notre Dame, for example. You find out a lot more about teams like that when they finally meet somebody. And Florida State's done that, and we saw that they ripped off 31 straight points against a team that I'm not going to say I'm guaranteed right now, but I'm leaning pretty heavily that LSU is a better football team this year than Clemson is.
No doubt. I would say that for sure. I mean, as bad as we looked against Boston College, you look and you got that win in your tank, and you look and see what they did in their conference opener, just destroying Mississippi State. That's a giant win in our pockets for sure. And I feel about the same as I felt as that LSU game. I feel like Clemson possibly could make it a tight game, and that could happen, but it's all either that or more towards Chris's score. I don't have a prediction quite yet. I'm leaning somewhere in the 17-point range, but I haven't put it quite together. Tomorrow for the Renegade Rundown, I'm going to have Jake Crane from the Daily Wire on, so probably going to debut it on that one at 7 Eastern before Chris's show, and go from there.
So let's get everyone square on that. George has his show at 7 p.m. Eastern time.
Yes, sir.
7 Eastern on Thursday. Check out the Renegade Report right here on YouTube, and we drop the link. And again, I don't want to screw this up. This is every Monday and Thursday, not just Thursday. We're back to Mondays and Thursdays. So you're all set up for Florida State run on Thursday night. You got George at 7 on Renegade Report. You got Chris, Spear Addicts Media, right here on YouTube, Mondays and Thursdays at 8 Eastern. I'll have my prediction on my YouTube memberships and also on Patreon. You can join me there. All right, guys, great show. Appreciate you being here to knock this out. You guys make this channel what it is. Join George after the game here right at the Voice of College Football as well. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Go Noles.